Hey traders, welcome back to the weekly Forex Forecast. In today's video, we do have a more streamlined video and format. Why? Because all of the scoring system is now done off of machine learning and I no longer have the Excel sheets as previously presented in previous videos. So what that means is instead of going through the economic calendar and instead of going through the individual currencies, we're going to go straight through the markets from now on, and I'm going to inject and add in pieces of information from the individual currencies or the economic calendar as and where relevant. Okay, so coming into next week, the two currencies I like the best to the upside are first and foremost the US dollar. US dollar long plays are my favorite setup heading into next week. Just bear in mind with the US dollar, we have CPI coming out next Wednesday. This is likely going to dictate the next market moves in the dollar, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the US dollar ranging or consolidating before that. So that really sets up two opportunities we'll look at in today's video. Range trading the dollar pairs before Wednesday, or if we don't get the opportunity, looking for the post-CPI setups in the dollar pairs. The second market I like to the upside is the Canadian dollar. Now, the Canadian dollar, we had an interest rate decision last week out of Canada. They held rates at 5% and they discussed continued quantitative tightening. This was fairly supportive of the Canadian dollar, and on top of that last week, we also have crude oil scoring pretty strong, and this is also a long on my watch list going into this week. So a combination of the interest rate decision last week and the holding of interest rates at 5% and the continued quantitative tightening with a stronger crude oil, which is going to help the Canadian dollar through the balance payments. I prefer US dollar and Canadian longs this week versus primarily the Japanese yen to the short side. This has been one of the best shorts we've been looking at pretty much all year. And I do think we're going to come down to the lows in the Japanese yen, and I'd like to take advantage of that and be short versus the CAD or the dollar given the opportunity this week. And also to the downside, I like the New Zealand, the Euro, and also the Aussie. But just bear in mind, we have an interest rate decision on Thursday out of the EU. And I do think we're probably going to see Euro pairs consolidating into Thursday. That's not a problem. And in fact, I would like to try and range trade some of these Euro pairs, Euro, Dollar, and EurCad, given the opportunity this week. Okay, so kicking us off is crude oil, and I like crude oil going into next week. This is the highest scoring commodity in the commodity scorecards, and actually, we've seen this move into the upside over the past few weeks. Any pullback in this market is considered an opportunity to look for long setups. I can only be long this market or do nothing next week. Selling crude oil is not an option for me. What I'm going to be looking for is a potential breakout intra-week into the 91 handle. Or if we hold this trend and we just pull back, and test the 84 level, this is the second place next week. I'd look for a short-term buying opportunity in crude oil. Next is US dollar Japanese yen. This is highlighted in gold just like crude oil because this is one of the key markets I'm going to be looking at in the Forex complex next week. I do really like this market. We've already had momentum and now we're consolidating. So any breakout intra-week is viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish setups into the 150 area. And if we pull back, so if we fail to break out intra-week and we just start to pull back like this and we test the 145.75 area, this is the second place next week. I'd be looking for a short-term buying opportunity in US dollar yen. My second favorite Forex pair is Aussie dollar. We also had an interest rate decision out of Australia last week. They held rates. However, we saw a sell-off in the Australian dollar. Why? Because they did highlight, and by they I mean the RBA, they highlighted the risks to the downside in economic growth, and the market took last week's interest rate decision as saying it's very, very unlikely the RBA are going to hike and this is the end of the cycle. That's why we saw the sell-off, and going into this week, this sets up a really nice opportunity to the downside for follow through, especially versus the Canadian dollar, which was supported last week by the interest rate decision and also the crude oil price. So having a look at Aussie dollar to the downside next week is definitely on my list. You can see we've already started to flag. We've formed this consolidation. So if we continue to do this, I'm going to be looking for a potential breakout intra-week down to the 0.6280. Just bear in mind, we do have CPI, so this may chop very much like US dollar yen. You may see them chopping into CPI. And then you get a breakout. So in US dollar yen, you get a breakout to the upside on CPI, and then you get the follow through into the back end of the week. Or maybe in Aussie dollar, you chop like this, and then you get the sell-off on CPI and pull back. I can either be short this or do nothing next week to be short, or to stay out of it altogether. So with those two options in mind, if we get a breakout intra-week before or after CPI, I would be looking for shorts down to the 0.6280. And if we just pull back and maybe we consolidate and we rally into the 0.6480 after CPI, so maybe it just goes nowhere. If we can get an opportunity up in this area before CPI, that would be good, because this market is likely to hold its range before CPI. Once CPI comes out, just bear in mind there's a very good chance we're going to see volatility in the dollar pairs. And these levels to the downside and the upside can be broken with big news events. You know, they can substantially break out to the upside or the downside. So if you are holding through CPI, just bear in mind you're taking that risk. But if we get an intra-week breakout to the downside, I'm going to be looking at being short. Or if we pull back, even after CPI, and there's no real reason for the Australian dollar to have gained strength versus the US dollar. In other words, it's just a bit of volatility. Perhaps we see CPI coming out as expected and we bounce higher. This is the second place next week. I'm going to be looking for a potential short in Aussie dollar. Next is New Zealand dollar. Very similar setup. We've got the sell-off and now we've got this consolidation. I am looking for further declines, so any continued pullback is viewed as the opportunity to look for a bearish breakout. Perhaps before, but perhaps after CPI takes place. And then I'm going to be looking for a follow-through down towards 0.580. If we pull back and maybe we do nothing, very much like Aussie dollar, and we just get a spike on CPI, but there's no reason really, for any move to the upside in New Zealand dollar. You often see this. Maybe CPI comes out as expected. We get a volatility spike. This would be the opportunity to fade that or to look for a short in New Zealand dollar to the downside. That's where I'm going to be looking at next week. So if we trade into this level before CPI, say we do it on Monday, that would be fantastic, because I'd look for this to hold its range. Markets don't tend to break out of these ranges, especially before a big news event. They kind of consolidate and chop around. So if we do get an early trade in the week, this would be a good one to hold. And the same principle will apply to the euro pairs when we look at them. Next is CAD yen. Now looking to take advantage of the Japanese yen trading into its lows, as I showed you earlier on. If this move is going to take place next week, and at the same time, of course, we get the US dollar rallying into the yearly high, that is why I like US dollar yen to the upside. But also, if we're going to have a stronger CAD, then CAD yen to the upside is another market I'm going to be looking at taking advantage of that potential trading into the lows in the yen itself. We've already moved sideways and consolidated, so any breakout next week is viewed as the opportunity to look for bullish setups. We break out with momentum. I'm going to be looking for a follow through into the 110 area. And if we fail to do that, if we just pull back and we trade into the range low, as you can see we've done here a number of times, this is going to be the second place next week. If we trade into the low, that I'll be looking for a short-term buying opportunity in CAD yen. Next is Aussie CAD, also consolidating here, and we don't have, unlike with US dollar, the CPI data coming out midweek. So this is a market that I do like to the downside. Any continued correction is viewed as the opportunity to look for a breakout intra-week down to the 0.8600. And if we just consolidate and we hold the trend and we hold the trend and we pull back and test the 0.880, this is the second place next week. I'll be looking for a short-term short opportunity in Aussie CAD. Next is New Zealand CAD. Now you can see we have started to, by the looks of it, break out of this. So any continued correction, again, is simply viewed as an opportunity this week to look for a new breakout to the downside, a pullback and a follow through into the 0.7940. And just like the other pairs here, if we just pull back and we don't break out, and usually one of those two things will happen during the week, if we just continue to hold this kind of sub breakout, because we've broken out already over here. If we just hold this and we continue to consolidate into the 0.8150, this is the second place next week. Maybe we come through it and test the highs. That would be great. We have some previous resistance here as well then. This would be the second place I'd be looking for a short-term short opportunity in New Zealand CAD next week. Next is euro dollar. Now we cover euro dollar every week, and I do like euro dollar shorts going into next week. The only issue we have is that we do have the CPI data on Wednesday and we have the ECB interest rate decision on Thursday. It does mean that the euro dollar market is likely going to be choppy and consolidating into kind of Wednesday and Thursday. If that's the case though, there may be an opportunity here, and this is one thing I'm going to be looking for next week. If we pull back in euro dollar, and I can either be short this or do nothing next week, buying euro dollar is not an option for me. But if we pull back and we retest the 1.0800 area, and perhaps this high over here, this is going to be a place where I would look for a short-term opportunity, maybe Monday or even Tuesday, ahead of the CPI, for this to hold its range. Essentially, it's like range trading. So it pulls back, it tests this early in the week, and you get the opportunity to short it. And the statement you're making is, this market is unlikely to have a significant breakout to the upside ahead of such major news events. So that's the setup I'm looking at in euro dollar next week. I do only favor shorts in this. And if this just consolidates and does nothing kind of into Wednesday, and Wednesday kind of passes uneventfully, and then on Thursday we get a sell-off and a breakout on the interest rate decision itself, that would be the follow-through Thursday, Friday I would be looking at to the downside in euro dollar. And the final Forex pair here is EurCad. Again, very similar to what we just looked at with the dollar. If we just consolidate and chop around and we get an early trade into the highs over here and the 1.4730, this is an area I would look for a range trade, a near-term short opportunity in EurCad. And if you get this opportunity on Monday or Tuesday, you're looking to be out of it by the interest rate decision. You don't want to necessarily take that risk on if it's just a short-term trading opportunity, if it's not something you're looking to position through. So I would like to see if we can get an early opportunity in EurCad. I'm only going to be shorting this market or doing nothing. If we pull back and consolidate, maybe even, and the same applies to euro dollar, maybe even on the interest rate decision we get a spike higher, that's the opportunity to look to fade this to the downside, assuming there's no extremely, hawkish euro catalyst. But if it's pretty much a non-event and we trade into here, I would be looking to fade this to the downside next week. And if we correct and break out on the interest rate decision, I would be looking for a follow through down to the 1.4460. So again, I can either be short these markets next week or do nothing. Buying these markets are not an option for me next week. Okay, so wrapping up the video with gold and silver. Bitcoin is not in the new scorecard system for Forex and commodities. It is, however, something we are looking at bringing back and scoring within crypto scorecards. We do not have them yet. It's something that's being requested, and it is something that we're looking into. We do want to put into place in the near future. However, it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of work, but we are planning to bring Bitcoin back within a separate cryptocurrency scorecard system. Going into next week, silver is the number one out of these two, short that I like the best. I can either be short both of these or do nothing. They're both, when we look at the scorecards, currently sort of bearish to neutral. And with a very, very strong dollar in the scorecard system, this does mean that it is going to be a headwind. In other words, it's going to cap prices or make gold and silver struggle to rally. So I do prefer gold and silver shorts based on that. Any pullback in silver next week, and this is my number one out of the two, short opportunity, is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish breakouts intra-week into the prior low at the 22.2. Or if we pull back and test the 23.70 area, this is the second place I'm going to be looking for a short in silver next week. And last but not least, we have gold. We've already started to break down after this double top reversal up in this area, and we've got some momentum we're starting to flag. So any continued pullback is viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish breakouts into the prior low at the 18.88 area. Or if we just pull back and we retest once again the 19.50 area roughly, this is the second place I'd be looking for a near-term short in gold next week. Again, I can either be short gold or silver or do nothing. Buying these markets is not an option for me personally next week. So that is it from me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the room each day where I go through these markets and the setups that I'm personally looking at with members on a daily basis for over 75 markets in different asset classes, including stocks, bonds, Forex, and commodities.